Morning, Washington, D.C. I have from there Joel Rayburn and I have Matt McInnis. Welcome. I know it's morning, but it's not too early morning. Welcome to Beirut Institute Summit e-Policy Circle number 33. I have from Moscow. Good afternoon, Moscow. Andrey Bystritskiy, thanks for joining us again. It is great to have Valdai Club represented with us. And also a good afternoon, late afternoon to Dubai, I believe, where Rahman Rashed is. And Rahman Rashed is not only an old friend, he's always an inspiring boss for all of us in the media. So welcome to, as I said, the 33rd session of Beirut Institute Summit in Abu Dhabi. The e-policy circles have been quite useful as a global conversation, and they couldn't have been so successful without the input of people like you. For that, I am grateful, but I don't want to take too much of your time at your expense. So therefore, 4 minutes to each of you, and then we engage in a conversation. Joel Rayburn, thank you for joining us again. There you go. 4 minutes to you, please.
Okay, well, it's my pleasure, Raghida. Thank you and the Beirut Institute for putting together these very informative policy sessions. I would like to just, I'd like to start with something that by reminding everyone of something that I was involved in the previous US administration, and that is that 4 years ago and 3 years ago, during this week in both 2017 and 2018, Bashar al-Assad attacked Syrian men, women, and children with chemical weapons. And in both of those years, 2017 and 2018, the United States actually took military action to deter the Assad regime from continuing atrocities like that. And in the second instance, the United States was joined by French and British allies. I start with that not just to point out that there continue to be very important issues of global concern in the northern Middle East, but also to point out, I would point out that the Trump administration was an administration that did not have Syria on its mind when it came into office, did not have a particular interest, it thought, other than in pursuing the campaign against Daesh, which was focused on Iraq at that time. But the northern Middle East has a way of reaching out and grabbing your attention if you're in a capital like Washington or London or Paris or in the Arab world. And I would say that it seems that we're in another window of time like that, when I think the Western capitals and maybe some Arab capitals, there's a desire to move on to other issues than those that have been so thorny over the last decade and even more, really 2 decades. And I understand that sentiment. We all would like to not have to deal with conflict, but I would just caution policymakers now that the northern Middle East, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, indeed even Jordan, it's a region that's too important to ignore. You cannot ignore it. You may try to ignore it, but if you do try to ignore it, it will reach out and grab your attention and force you to formulate a policy if you don't have one. Now, having said that, those are lessons from the last decade or two. I do think we need to be looking forward, and there are some trends that I think need to be highlighted. But the first one is that the Syrian conflict in particular, I'll talk on that, is far from resolved. The internal conflict is a political conflict first and foremost. The Syrian war started with a political conflict. Its causes are political, and so its resolution has to be political. So until there is a political resolution to that conflict, it will burn on and on. But I would also say Syria and to some degree Iraq, both of these remain strategically significant geopolitical battlefields. There are active wars and proxy wars going on in both of those countries. And there are also fields of very significant geopolitical competition. So I think the great powers and the great powers of the world and the middle powers of the world are going to have to remain very intensely engaged in this region of the northern Middle East in the years to come. I would say that the approach, if you're a Western policymaker, if you're a US policymaker, the approach to these conflicts has to be comprehensive. They can't be reduced to an issue just of counterterrorism or an isolated issue just of humanitarian assistance. Those are just symptoms of the underlying conflicts, both the internal conflicts and the geopolitical conflicts. And until the causes are addressed, the symptoms will just return over and over again, as we have seen in both Iraq and Syria. That's about 4 minutes for me, Raghida. I know there's a lot more to say about this, but I'll stop as the initial salvo right there.
I will do just a quick follow-up with you. Do you think that President Bashar al-Assad is out of the woods? That means he's safe, he is already rehabilitated, if you will, and it's further guaranteed that he will be safe, let's put it this way, if that Vienna meeting produces a very good new page between the United States and Iran. Let's just say details later, but do you think he's out of the woods? Is he in for good?
No, I don't. The Assad regime is internally very brittle, very weak. Their own choices have made them weaker month by month by month. And I would say that the regime in Damascus for some time now has been in a slow motion process of collapse. Also, I think that there is simply no sentiment for normalization with the Assad regime as it is in the Western capitals, certainly not here in the United States. The sentiment against the Assad regime runs very strong. I would say stronger now than it did 4 years ago, even in the US Congress, for example. And I know that the European capitals remain very staunchly, they're rigid in their position concerning normalization with the Assad regime.
Thank you, Joel Rayburn. I'm going to go to Abdel Rashed. I'm going to give you 4 minutes, and when you finish, please address the issue if that normalization process with the Bashar al-Assad regime is in fact happening by some Gulf states, Arab Gulf states, or not. But we have had some signs. If you don't mind elaborating on that after you finish with your 4 minutes, because you want to say what you want to say in the first 4 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Raghida. I'm honored to be with you, and thank you to be with the respected guest as well. Well, I don't know if I will probably, it's more excited to talk about Syria and the conflict there than probably talking about oil and the Gulf. But anyhow, I'll try to brief so we can jump to the Syrian issue. I believe the coming few years, it will be mostly dominated by the oil security issue, which is the flow of oil to the Asian Pacific and in particular to China. So I believe now we are just starting to see more of some sort of signs of clearer conflict between China and the United States. And at the same time, we are getting mixing signals from Washington, D.C. In one way, they are not very happy to see that Chinese are expanding, moving, having military presence somewhere in Northern Africa. They are not happy to see that Chinese are tickling and communicating with their allies in the region. They're not even happy to see that Chinese are making deals with their enemies, which is Iran. So the United States, what we see or what we perceive today, they want to stay in the region, politically speaking. At the same time, they are already reducing their military presence in Iraq, Syria, in the Gulf waters as well. China, on the other hand, it's increasing, it's slowly moving into the region. We see more Chinese companies working in different countries, whether Iran, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, and obviously China, Sudan. If you look to this part of the region, the Chinese have made some progress right now, whether it's military progress or economic progress. And the reasons for that is obvious. China now is the biggest importer of oil in the region. The United States now is not anymore an important player in the oil game in the Middle East because it's a competitor. It's an exporter actually. So this is really historical changes what we see today comparing what has been in the region for the past 50, 70 years ago. Now that the Americans, they look at the region from oil security, not as oil import-export issue, but in terms of their competition with the Chinese. And obviously those who can control the oil fields or control the oil waterways, they can somehow have more say in international politics. And we believe the Chinese right now inheriting the same old game, which is trying to be a broker between the Arabs and the Iranians, between the two warring sides. And whether the Chinese can succeed what the Americans have failed in doing, this is to be seen in the future. But it's very complicated, really. The Chinese probably, they don't understand the complication of the regional conflicts in terms of either religious or in terms of economics or in terms of fighting over resources or hegemony. We're looking at obviously the Russians as well. So the Russians are playing, I don't think they are really a major factor in deciding the future of the Gulf area, but they are important. They are very smart players. They have good relations now with the Iranians and the Gulf countries as well. They are arms suppliers. They are sovereign fund investors. They are all everywhere around the region, but we haven't seen yet a clear policy of the Russians. What side are they going to end up with? They have to take a side, either with the Gulf countries or with the Iranians and similar. So, but anyhow, we can talk more later if you want.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much, Abdurrahman, Rashed. Andrey Bystritskiy, again, I'm going to put a thought in your head after your 4 minutes. Do the Russians feel that they have to take a side, or do they feel that they are the broker that they can bring all sides together? Think of that for after your 4 minutes. Please go ahead. Andrey Bystritskiy.
Thank you very much. Do you remember giant container ship stuck in Suez Canal? This stuck container ship turns out to provide a gloomily apt illustration. The old and narrow Suez Canal, of course, was not designed to accommodate ships the size of a small city. Moreover, it turned out no one really thought about what to do in the event of an accident involving this class of ship. To extend this, the analogy, we can say that the world's elite, primarily those claiming the leadership of the Western world, are trying to push the ships of the new world through the Suez Canal of current policy. This can lead to consequences much more serious than a flotilla of container ships being stuck off the coast of the Sinai Peninsula. Thus, the latest statements by the United States administration seem to have been made by people who live to some extent in an imaginary world, in a world in which Western countries, and primarily the United States, maintain moral, political, economic, and military leadership. The trouble, however, with the kind of imagination which generates such illusions is not only and even not so much in the desire for domination. So what else is new? The trouble is that this aspiration has nothing to do with the plans for the future, with development or with promising models of globality. On the contrary, there is a feeling that many Western politicians are stuck in the past, trying to reproduce the construction of the times of the confrontation between the United States and Soviet Union. That time has passed. We need new narratives and new understanding that the world is indeed becoming multipolar. The globalization, inevitable for the development of mankind, has taken new paths. That there are now many.
Please come closer. Don't go further.
Excuse me. Yes, my speech is nothing without sound. I agree.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, and that is all growing out of the regional association and alliances. Naturally, the Middle East, with its fragmentation and diversity, faces the need to rethink itself, its identity, its values, its role in the world as whole, and the role of the surrounding world on its own development. About your question, the main question is, do we need United States, for instance, for our problems in Eurasia? Maybe not. United States is a nice country. They have in the United States a lot of problems, but there is there are Russia, China, India. Why United States? Who are they? They're nice people, fantastic. I respect them. They're brilliant guys. They have fantastic rockets. They have a lot of ideas, even Elon Musk and a lot of nice people. But why do we need them? Maybe they need us. Okay.
All right. Okay. I got you. Thank you very much, Andrey Bystritskiy, Matt McInnis. You're nice people, but they don't need you. They don't need you there. So I know, again, I'm throwing things at you before your 4 minutes. You could address that after your 4 minutes or right away. It's up to you. Matt McInnis, please, 4 minutes to you.
Yeah. Good afternoon and good morning to everyone. Raghida, thank you for inviting me to this. This is a great panel. And I certainly take, looking at the current administration's Iran policy and what they're looking to do with potentially re-entering the JCPOA. There are meetings ongoing in Vienna, major meetings yesterday, and there will be more coming up later this week. The expectations, frankly, I don't see anything that's going to really stop both sides from trying to at least de facto get back into the JCPOA. I don't know if it'll be any kind of formal agreement that they could get to that. I do think there's a lot of domestic opposition to that, frankly, maybe even on both sides, certainly here within the U.S. But I can't foresee a situation where we're going to have Iran and the U.S. simply continue to escalate right now. And so I think it's where we're heading. You're seeing, Iran make the announcements that it's going towards 55 kilograms of 20% enriched uranium, which is a very fast pace. We don't know if that's actually true. The IAEA has not verified these statements, but you can see a lot of actions on Iran's side, to really put more leverage, more pressure on the U.S. and the international community. It's desperate for sanctions relief. As much as they may claim maximum pressure, had failed, in the end, maximum pressure had a very significant impact for them. And I think that they're looking for a way out. And I hope that the Biden administration does not waste that leverage that was built up under the Trump administration. Moving on to things that I'm really, concerned about in the region as a whole, particularly Iran is the major culprit here too, but the proliferation of weapons throughout the region, particularly weapons to non-state actors. What we've seen with the Houthis, obviously with Lebanese Hezbollah, what we're seeing with the Shia militias in Iraq. That's been an ongoing problem. I think in the last few years, there's been a broader international recognition that we need to do more to prevent the proliferation of very sophisticated drones, missiles, and other, air defense and other equipment around the region without, again, it's not tied to states. These are non-state actors. And what's been particularly concerning in the last few months is this evolution of some of these non-state actors like Kateb Hezbollah in Iraq actually launching, overt military strikes against Saudi Arabia and potentially targeting other Gulf states. We're seeing that's a real kind of change over the last year or so, where we're seeing these proxies, kind of shake off plausible deniability. Iran is making clear messages to states in the region that it's willing to take much stronger military actions against its rivals, against its competitors, and I think this is a really concerning trend. Another thing that the Biden administration is going to deal with, and we dealt with this in the Trump administration, is that our partners and allies in the region, they're going to be perhaps increasingly taking their own path on something, and this is where it comes down to the U.S.'s role, how we need to still provide leadership in the region, but our allies are calculating between Russia, China, us, Iran, and I think this is something that is going to continue to change the dynamics in the region quite a bit. And in particular, what's been interesting, with Russia's significant entry into Syria and into the rest of the Middle East back in 2015, that has started a larger shift, I think, certainly within the Levant and the Eastern Mediterranean. What's been very interesting and concerning to watch is this growing competition, as well as at times cooperation between Russia and Turkey, and how that is spreading, into areas in the Caucasus. We saw this play out during the Nagorno-Karabakh war in the last year, and I think this is something that we have to pay close attention to. And finally, wrapping up the China-Iran relationship, I know that their economic agreement has been in the news. And as I know, Raghida, you have written about this. I see China and Iran have been working on this deal, frankly, for a number of years. And China has investments all around the region. They're not putting all their eggs into the Iranian basket, but they do see this as a way to improve their overall position in the region and continue to assert their influence and pushing it back against U.S. and Western role there in the region. And with that, I'll close.
Thank you very much. Let's try to unpack some of these issues one by one, if possible. Let's start with the Vienna talks. Let me hear from you first. What is your prediction, Matt McInnis? What is your prediction that by the time we get to it, before the elections in Iran or apart from the elections in Iran, you think that the Biden administration is desperate enough to have any deal, a success story, a foreign policy success story that it's going to give in to what the Iranians are demanding? Or do you think that there are hurdles that are unsurmountable? Go ahead, Matt McInnis. And what happened in Vienna, if you know what happened?
Yeah, we understand that there was there were meetings of the parties to the deal. The U.S. was there, kind of in background, and we understand that that there's been I'm sure a lot of engagement on the sidelines there, and there's decisions to at least we're hearing reports that all sides do think that they are moving towards some type of new arrangement. You saw President Rouhani describe it as as a positive, constructive activity there this past week. You see, the U.S. has not made significant comments about it, but I think that they're I'm not anticipating major breakthroughs if you're looking for that right now. But you do get the overall sense that both sides are looking for a way to get back in, and it's a question of sequencing. Who's going to go first? What sanctions are going to come off? I wouldn't be surprised if you see things, particularly the banking sanctions on Iran, on the central bank of Iran, financial sanctions. I think those are going to be a high target for both Iran and the U.S. to talk about. So I think that's you're inevitably going to see some relaxation of the sanctions. I don't see how that's going to change.
I see. Quickly before, just very quickly, because I want to go to Abdel Rashed on that. So the sequencing that you're talking about, will there be, or is there any secret understanding as to when will they touch upon, let's just say the missiles is on one hand, but more importantly, more focused, my question is on the regional behavior. You spoke of what you call the weapons to non-state actors, etc. Can you quickly just give me a 30 seconds answer on this? Is there an understanding as to when will they speak of regional behavior of Iran?
Certainly the U.S. side is saying it wants to talk about that, and I think that they are hoping to. The Iranians have been pretty clear that they do not want to do that. And to be frank, as much as I expect some reversion to the JCPOA this year, I don't expect there to be progress on the comprehensive talks. I think Joel was absolutely right earlier on that we need to address the full spectrum of Iran's activities. But I think we're going to see the Iranians really dig in their heels, and I'm afraid that we're going to give up too much of our leverage to try to negotiate something more.
Abdel Rashed, what do you say about this? And I know that Arabs are not at the table in any way right now, and there is no signs that there will be, even in step 1 and step 2 approach to the talks between the 5+1 and Iran. Can you address this, please, Abdel Rashed?
Well, it's really, this is the most sensitive topic right now, because everything depends on the outcome of the possible or potential negotiation between the Americans and the Iranians, and the outcome, whether they would have a deal with the Iranians or not. I think the result will be quite devastating if the Obama legacy will continue in terms of all they care about is just the nuclear deal and that's it. if the behavior of the regime in Tehran will not be limited clearly in all the areas out the western side of Iran, which is the Gulf, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Gaza. If Iran does not stop meddling in these places, I think I think the Americans will have serious problem with their allies, who will tend to go more to other countries, superpowers in the world, like the Chinese, the Russians.
Okay.
So.
Can a country like Saudi Arabia afford to just say, well, I've had it with you, the United States, I'm going China way, I'm going towards Russia?
No, it's not necessarily either or. We're not in the Cold War era where you have to have a place here or there. There are not necessarily the two old camps. You still can have good relations, less relations with the Americans, and more military with some sort of political strategic with other countries like the Chinese and the Russians. But I think this is going to be on the expense of the American interest here. Okay. They will win Iran, but they will lose at least 5 countries in the region.
I see. Very interesting. But one more time, Abdurrahman Rashed, you said that the Russians, and probably you meant also the Chinese, that they have to take a side. Do you think the Russians or the Chinese are going to take a side with the Arab Gulf states and say, farewell, Iran?
No, it's China. They don't have to have sides, because China is a big shopper in their area. They are the one with the money. They are the ones who will be able to finance all countries in the region. They are the ones who will now almost import 1 million barrels a day from Iran, 2 million barrels from Saudi Arabia. They can afford to be friends with both sides. The Russians actually not. They are competitors. They sell oils. They don't import oils. So eventually the Russians have to take sides, in my opinion, yes.
I see. Andrey Bystritskiy, do you think so? Do you think that you really must take sides, or is there any possibility that the Russians would consider taking sides? Because we know that the Russians are trying to play a bigger role, to be a broker between Israel and Syria, Israel and Iran, Israel and probably Hezbollah, Israel and the Arab Gulf states even. So they want to be a broker. So do you think that the day will come that Russia would take a side if obliged to? And which side would that be? Would that be Iran or the Arab Gulf states? Andrey Bystritskiy.
Thank you very much indeed for your question. I would like to say that, of course, Russia don't take a side. Russia prefer to find balance between all countries and to be friends for all countries in the region, and not only this region, even not to be friends with United States. Anyway, I don't agree that Russia has to take side, must take side. No, it seems to me the main Russia idea, the main Russia motivation is to find balance and security on the south from Russia. And it's the main idea. It's historically, it's very clear, because the last 300 years it was Russian dream to find balance, of course, to play important role, no doubts. But the main idea is to help countries to find solutions, to give them frame for dialogue, for conversation, and so on and so on. Because of course, Russia is not China. China is a huge country, a superpower, real superpower, with money, with opportunities, and and China now is a new player in this region. Not new totally, but the role and the position of Chinese, this role is increasing, and China definitely, it's absolutely clear, is trying to play more important role to take under control a lot of processes in this region. Russia is trying to find a global solution for this region. Global, for all participants.
What, Andrey Bystritskiy? What's Russia trying to do? Find what?
To find, excuse me, maybe it's probably to find a global solution for this region. Global solution, including China, United States, India, Turkey, Western Europe, it's a main idea. Of course, there are a lot of sub-solutions, if you like, in this region between China, Iran, and Russia, for instance. But at the same time, the general idea, from my point of view, of course, I can make mistake, but from my idea, it's the main idea is finding for global and relatively mutual useful solution.
Okay, Joel Rayburn, the Russians in Syria, have they won, or there is still a potential quagmire?
Listen, the relationship that the United States has with Russia is very stormy. It's very difficult, but on Syria, it's essential right now. It's not going to be that way for a long time, I think. If we were having this forum 10, 12, 15 years from now, Raghida, I think we love our Russian colleague, but he would not be here because Russia, let's put it in perspective. Russia is a country with a very small economy, smaller than that of Italy, about half the size of that of India, 1/10 the size of that of the United States and China. It has a small and declining population relative to the United States, India, and China. And I just don't think that Russia is going to be able to sustain influence 10, 12, 15 years down the road. That's not to say they don't play an important role now, but I think more and more they're playing, but the role they're playing is not constructive. I don't think people trust them as a broker. They're playing a spoiling role. And in Syria, they had a strategic objective a little over 5 years ago of spending 6 months to try to extricate their last remaining Middle Eastern client state from an internal conflict, and they were unable to do it. I think last year we saw the Russians hit their ceiling on influence in the Syrian realm. They suffered a military setback at the hands of Turkey. Then they had another military setback at the hands of Turkey in Libya and Nagorno-Karabakh. So I think we've already passed the apogee of Russian influence. I think that it's inevitable at some point that the Russians will have to accept some kind of transition in Syria, because otherwise that regime is just going to collapse on its own, and the Russians can't really change that.
Russian transition out of Syria, is this what you mean?
No, I mean a political transition in Damascus, as called for in UN Security Council Resolution 2254.
So I hear you say basically that the role that Russia is interested in playing, which is the big global solution, the broker, the big role in regionally and internationally. I sense that you're thinking this is too big for you.
Yeah, I think it's counterproductive even for Russian interests. I mean, they've alienated a lot of people, a lot of countries in the Middle Eastern region. So I don't think that's sustainable. I mean, it would be better if they would contribute to a constructive solution in some of these conflicts, rather than doing things like sending the Wagner Group and Prigozhin's mercenaries to make things worse, or continuing to threaten to invade their neighbors and so on. I just don't see this as this is not something that is sustainable. It causes sort of a collective backlash from other states, just as a matter of course. Let me make one point, Raghida, we were wondering all along in 2019, in particular in 2020, whether when we instituted the Caesar Act sanctions, whether Russia was going to come to Bashar al-Assad's rescue and bail out the regime in Damascus. And I think we've seen that that's not going to happen. So I think that the Syrian regime, it's in an economic meltdown that's largely of its own making. It has a lot of causes. It has the fact that Assad regime was milking the Lebanese financial sector for decades, and now they can no longer do that because Beirut has run dry as a source of milk for them. And so they're suffering in Damascus as a result. The Assad regime, as it came under the pressure of shortages, its own internal corruption and greed and economic mismanagement, stupidity, led to a lot of loss in that economy. And then more recently, the fact that I think the countries of the region and the Mediterranean have disrupted a lot of the Assad regime's Captagon trafficking means that there's a shortfall of revenue going to the Assad regime. Those things are all economic problems of the Assad regime's own making, and Russia has shown either it cannot or it will not bail Assad out from his own choices.
Joel Rayburn, one more thing. The Caesars Act, do you think the Biden administration will eliminate the Caesars Act and the Magnitsky Act, please? But because there are certain countries from the Gulf who thought that the Caesars Act should be taken out of the way in order to rehabilitate the relations between the Arab Gulf states and Syria.
Well, the Caesar Act is a law. It's a law that was passed by Congress. It was a law that had the support of more than 420 members of Congress, is my recollection. It's one of the most popular pieces of legislation that's come through Washington in recent years. It's not going anywhere. People who are lobbying against the Caesar Act are wasting their time. That part of the U.S. approach to Syria is not going to change. There's a huge and very strong caucus in Congress in support of the Caesar Act, and again, people who are arguing for the United States to discard the Caesar Act are going to have to go and change the minds of more than 400 members of Congress. It's not.
And the Magnitsky Act?
Magnitsky, I think, is in the same place. There is no discussion here. Matt can back me up on this. There is no serious discussion in Washington of somehow removing the Global Magnitsky Act or the Caesar Act. Nothing. Zero.
Matt, what do you think? He asked your opinion, Matt McInnis?
Yeah, no, I think Joel is absolutely right. I would be very surprised if we saw moves in Congress or push by the White House to push back on both Magnitsky or Caesar. Honestly, the tool is really whether the Biden administration is going to implement those laws effectively. It is more of a case of enforcement and more rather than a repeal of those acts. I just don't see that happening.
Right. Rahman, Rashed, can we switch to the second big story of the last 10 days, which is that China-Iran pact? Okay, well, some people dismissed it as, in fact, even in the US, many people said, oh, it's not very important, it's never going to happen. And for those of us who've been writing about it for a while, we said, yes, it is happening, so take note. Now it is, it's a serious pact. We don't even know all the details. We don't even know the secret parts of it. What impact would it have on the relationship between Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, the major Arab countries with China? I mean, again, talking about having your cake and eat it. The Chinese are in that position. They are now a major player with Iran, protector of Iran, I argue anyway. What is going to happen, Abdurrahman al-Rashid, with the reaction? When will the Arab Gulf states say, look, we do have leverage too. You need to influence the Iranians to have better behavior in order for us to continue these huge economic relations? Or are you tied up that you cannot do that? Abdurrahman al-Rashid.
No, we are not in a very strong position to dictate on China, to be honest. They import most of our oil, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, all of them actually, whether gas or oil. So, and we are a big market for them, I mean, relatively speaking. So the agreement between Tehran and Beijing will test this kind of relationship between China and the other Arab countries. So I think the Chinese now, what they are proposing, they are trying to say, let's have peace between our trade partners. This is, in theory, sounds okay, sounds good, but in reality, it's almost impossible to implement. Oh. And we have two different regimes completely, like North Korea and South Korea. It's not easy to have peace between the two countries, or trust at least. Oh. So the Chinese right now will increase importing oil from Saudi Arabia and other GCC countries. We're talking about right now, China needs 13 million from all over the world. And it will be 16 million barrels by the end of this decade, which is very soon. So the Chinese are desperate to have oil from countries like Saudi Arabia. Iran will not be enough to get to supply them with oil. Saudi is probably the biggest, most important to the Chinese. Now, China is not the only importer one, Raghida here. Remember, India, which is not on good term with China, and it's a competitor in the energy market as well. Also will compete with China very soon in the Gulf waterways. So I assume we will have little leverage, but not much leverage. I think the Chinese.
But you can use that leverage, Abdel Rashed. You can,
yeah.
if you choose to, you can use that leverage not to push the Chinese against the Iranians or dictate to them what to do with Iran, but at least to say, here's the chance of how you can influence the Iranian behavior in the Arab geography, if you will. Why won't you?
The problem is that it is with the Iranians. They're not pragmatic enough. You can deal with them. So the Chinese will have difficulties. How are the Chinese going to convince the Iranians to stop meddling in Iraqi affairs or threaten Saudi Arabia or Emirates, you see? These countries are extremely important to China. What sort of, are the Chinese going to do like the Americans, what they did in the 80s and the 90s and the 21st centuries? Are they going to wage wars? I don't think the Chinese will do that, will go that far. But the Chinese now, they have military base in Djibouti. They are showing some military muscles, but it's just for the waterways. They are not really. I don't think Chinese will be a major active military power in the region.
All right, Joe Rayburn, I really want you to comment on this. And Andrey Bystritskiy, I'm going to come back to you, I promise you, and give you much more time. But I need Joe Rayburn with the background of the military background that you have. Can you address what Abdurrahman Rashed just said?
Do you mean the whether the Chinese will have a military presence in the Middle East? It's very.
And what does that mean for the U.S.?
Well, I think it's very difficult to see that. It'd be very difficult for the Chinese to project power like that anytime soon. But I would say this is for sure. There is a competition that's growing between the United States and China, and it's now manifesting itself in all the regions of the world. But the main geopolitical problem in the Middle East right now is the Iranian regime's military expansion into the Arab world, into the northern Middle East, and also into Western Arabia. And this is something, it's the Chinese, I think it's beyond their means to address. And it's something that is an existential danger to the countries that Abdel Rahman is talking about. So this is a problem that is in our faces right now. The Iranian regime mounting military expeditions to try to control the northern Middle East and reach through the northern Middle East to the Mediterranean, to militarily control the Strait of Hormuz and to militarily control the Bab el-Mandeb, and be able to try to militarily choke, if they choose to, the economic relationship between Europe and the Far East, with the Middle East in between. This is something it's not sustainable. It's not acceptable to any of those regions. But this is the conflict.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Finish your sentence.
No, I'm done.
What was the last thing you said? Because I spoke over your voice, which is not nice.
No, I was saying that this situation, which seems to be the aim of the generals of the Revolutionary Guard, to be able to have militarily destabilizing influence in the Mediterranean, the Bab el-Mandeb, and the Strait of Hormuz, is unacceptable for the rest of the world. So it's not something that can stand.
And do you think that the Arab Gulf states are using any leverage they have, or you don't think they have any leverage to be used with?
They do have leverage, and they will have to use it, because I think, unfortunately, the JCPOA, a nuclear agreement between Iran and other powers, addresses none of this. But this is the problem of the moment, and it's an existential problem for the countries of the Middle East, and it's a huge, strategically significant problem in terms of power and economic power for both Europe and the Far East. And so this is the question that is going to thrust itself upon us, and not the minutiae of the JCPOA.
Andrey Bystritskiy, what does Russia think about the China-Iran pact? I mean, Iran is supposed to be your ally, basically, in Syria. Russia is very protective of Iran. Do you think that you complement each other with this relationship between China and Iran? Or is this a sort of distribution of roles between China and Russia regarding the region. Please, Andrey Bystritskiy, but come closer so that we can hear you better.
I am as close as possible. Next position, I will be in the screen. Of course, I will be happy to be closer to you. Don't worry. I think it will happen. It's inevitable. But first of all, about Russia and China and Iran. I have mentioned that it's a very serious question. During conference, you mentioned it, the Middle East awakening and something else. The discussion about triangle, Russia, Iran, and China took place, and it was very interesting. Of course, it's a new challenge for Russia. It's a new challenge. China, of course, it's no doubt, China is paving way for new future in this region, maybe for the new future for whole world, because China has a plan, has strategy, has ideas. They are very big, very serious. And instead of US Congress, the Central Committee Party doesn't adopt laws for the rest part of the world. And it's important. China is very soft, not so arrogant like United States, for instance. No crazy exceptionalism, and China is not pretending to be open leader of the world. No. China is very modest. They try to play a role. Okay, we're good guys, we can help. Of course, it's a real challenge. But from my point of view, the world configuration is changing before our eyes. We must understand the Middle East in the context of the new world, because it's additional question whether the Middle East has agency. It's very important. For Russia, it's extremely important because okay, we can think about Russia, what you like, but at the same time, from my point of view, generally, main Russian intentions to try to combine balanced and safe and comfortable for Russia to world. Russia is not so strong country. Joe is absolutely right. Not so big, not so powerful. But at the same time, Russia is not nothing. Russians have some friends, ideas, understanding of the world. Anyway, the problem is, and it is the main problem of Chinese challenge. No stable balance of power can be achieved today. In the near future, we will live in the system of ad hoc alliances. It's very important. China, from my point of view, has understood it, and they try to play in the new world configuration. And in this sense, the United States, China, India, Western Europe, Russia will have to maneuver, seek support from and compete with one another. It's very complicated. It's like medieval war, very flexible, very unstable, and seriously, it's a serious challenge. China is extremely important country in the contemporary world. We should be extremely careful and smart in this case. Thank you.
One quick question for you, Andrey Bystritskiy, but really quickly. How is it going, what you're trying to do between Israel and Syria? You're trying to bring them together behind the scenes. And how is it going with Iran? You are, I think it's even at the level of President Putin that attempts are made to somehow pave the way for better understandings behind the scenes or up front, whichever it is, between Iran and Israel. How's that going?
I know what I know, but first of all, Russian administration and President Putin, they're very close to Israel and support Israel in all sense. there are a lot of connections between Russia and Israel, because there are a lot of Jews in Russia and in Israel, a lot of connections, families, and so on and so on. I think a quarter or maybe 1/3 of population of Israel from Russia. No, from Soviet Union. It's first. Second.
Is it going well? I mean, are you succeeding, or are there big, or is there big resistance on the part of, is Syria first? Is Syria eager to have normalization?
Syria now is between three forces: Turkey, Russia, Iran. Of course, illegal U.S. troops on the east of Syria. But it doesn't matter in our conversation. But Syria has to seek Russian support, of course. Iranians, they're against. Okay, it's very complicated balance. I think it's the art of diplomacy.
All right. Okay. All right. Let me go to Matt McInnis. Matt, did I ask you about which you are the expert on that, on the China-Iran pact? Did you say what you wanted to say about that? Because again, I just want to understand, why is it not so worrisome for the United States? Is it possible that China might use its relationship with Iran to temper down the Iran and the Iranian behavior, and to use it as a chip in its saying to the United States, look, I can influence the Iranians. I can do this because I now extend protection to the regime in Tehran.
Yeah, I mentioned some of this in my opening remarks, but again, they've been working on this particular pact for some time. And you remember when some of the first leaks came out last year about it, the Chinese actually didn't really want this to get out. This was something that the Iranian side leaked. Because I think China is worried about being seen, taking sides in the current, conflicts and competition right now in the region. So, China is trying to be careful with it. It is playing all sides. I do think what's going to be interesting to watch, especially during the JCPOA related negotiations, is traditionally China didn't play a huge role in this. Russia was really kind of between Russia and the U.S. Moderated by the Europeans, but the drivers were really us and Russia and Iran to get to the agreement back in 2015. And certainly I expect most of that to be similar this round, where it's a bilateral discussion, the Russians are involved, the Europeans are involved. If China starts taking this relationship with Iran as a more serious thing, and they try to frankly assert themselves as more explicit defenders of Iran in these types of larger international fora or broader concerns like that, that's where I can see a real change. I don't see this as like a new military alliance per se. I don't think China would ever want to get drugged into something that kind of commits them to defend Iran in this situation. I would be very surprised. But it is interesting what China is trying to do in the region on the military side that you were talking about earlier with Joel and Abdel, that I do think that they're going to have investments in freedom of navigation, with their base in Djibouti. It's going to be very interesting what the Iranian relationship with the Houthis and security in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb. That could be an interesting flashpoint between the Iranians and the Chinese.
I'm going to give you 30 seconds to do your concluding remark, because I want to go around. But can you give me another 20 seconds on the third very major event of this week, which is what happened in Jordan? Take 20, 30. Go ahead. Matt McInnis.
Okay. I'm not a Jordan expert, but certainly, Jordan is really critical for stability in the Levant and in the Eastern Mediterranean. If we saw something, really change there, that could be very difficult for U.S. and our allied interests. So I hope we are not heading into a period of significant stability there in Oman.
Another 30 seconds for your last remark.
Oh, for me.
Yeah.
I just think that it's the Biden administration has a lot on its plate. I know, and I anticipate the Middle East, Biden doesn't want the Middle East to be the dominant issue, but as Joel said earlier on, it'll drag you back in. And I'm really hoping that the administration takes seriously the need to address Iran's activities throughout the region, that we're not going to have stability unless we can find ways to address that both ourselves and with our partners and friends in the region. So for me, this is, we have a tall order. There's a lot we have to do right now, but I do hope the Biden team understands what they're facing.
Abdurrahman, Rashed, Jordan, and concluding remarks, but Jordan first.
I think Jordan confirmed, the fear in the region after 2011, after the Arab Spring. So nobody really wants any more spring. So that's old spring. Nobody wants it right now. We still suffer from what happened in either in Yemen or in Libya or Syria. So I believe people just immediately jumped and they said, look, stability matters. It comes first. And this is exactly the message now everyone is talking about. We definitely need a stable Jordan. Doesn't matter how and why. Doesn't matter where people stand. And I think King Abdullah has proven over the years he was able to manage the economy and the country with minimum resources to the best. So I think Jordan is just a short blip.
But before you give me your concluding remarks, but you have read and heard and plenty of outside interference in what happened in Jordan, and
yes.
Some have pointed fingers at Israel, some pointed finger at Saudi Arabia. Tell me.
I think people will throw dirt at each other in the region, so they will accuse each other. The last word should be by the Jordanians. Jordanians should say at the end, if there was any foreign meddling, they should say who did. I am sure, all the names being thrown around these days is not true.
30 seconds to you. Thank you very much, Abdurrahman Rashed. 30 seconds to you, Andrey Bystritskiy, for concluding.
Correct.
No, stay with me just stay with me, Abdurrahman Rashed, for another 2 minutes, 1 minute, okay? Before you go. Go ahead. Andrey Bystritskiy, 30 seconds, please. We're almost done.
About Jordan, I am absolutely sure you know very famous book by Michel Foucault, Psychiatric Power Authority, about medicine power. It's very strange situation. About Middle Eastern region, in conclusion, I'm absolutely sure we have to overcome today problems. And I'm absolutely sure that all main players in this region should be together. Of course, I understand a lot of conflicts, a lot of problems, but there is only one way. We could be together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrey Bystritskiy. And last word to you, Joel Rayburn. Again, Jordan, and concluding remarks, please.
But on Jordan, it looks like the situation is going to be handled inside the royal family, which I think is appropriate. For me, the takeaway here in Washington was that the United States can't take anything for granted in the Middle East, and it can't overfocus on one particular issue like the JCPOA. I would say that the biggest problem for the United States, for the Arab countries, and for the West in the Middle East is, as I mentioned, this unprecedented military expansion of the Iranian regime into these territories. Until that problem is solved, resolved, and there is a rollback of Iranian military influence, there will be no normalization between Israel and the Assad regime, for example, that is helping to enable that Iranian military invasion of the Middle East. And people who think otherwise are getting too high on the Assad regime's Captagon.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I hope to see you in Abu Dhabi for the 4th edition of Beirut Institute Summit. Hopefully, we're aiming for October.
Electricity has been finished in Beirut. Thank you, gentlemen. See you.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrey. Yeah, there will be no power outage in Abu Dhabi when we meet there.
Yes. We should bring power together to Abu Dhabi. Okay, nice to meet you, colleagues. Nice to meet you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Great conversation.
Thank you, Raghida.